In a previous video, we've created the address class, and then we bound the instance of the address to the address property of the person class. But as you may remember, our IDE did not quite recognize the fact that we are using the address object as this address property, and it highlighted this full method because it didn't know basically that this address is an object of any kind, and it might contain this full method. So today we are going to have a look at the DocBlocks. Let's quickly open a browser, and we are going to navigate to phpdoc.org, and let's have a look at what DocBlock actually is. And what it says here is that a DocBlock is a special type of comment that can provide verbose information about an element in your code. The information provided in this type of comment can be used by developers to gain understanding of the function of the given element, but it is also used by IDEs to provide, amongst others, autocompletion, and by PHP Documenter to generate API documentation. So there are several things that basically DocBlocks allow us to do. As you can see, developers obviously can easier understand your code as well, because there's some information which can describe what the method does. It tells us what type of the value it might return, what type of parameters it takes, and so on. But also IDEs, again, for autocompletion. So once we've applied these DocBlocks, our IDE should be able to recognize the fact that this address property is actually instance of the address object, and it will remove this highlight on the full method. And then obviously this PHP Documenter can generate API documentation. It's a package that allows us to auto-generate the documentation for our application. So let's have a look at there's an example obviously here. We have the DocBlock starts with a / and two asterisks, then each line has an asterisk, and the last line starts with the asterisk and ends with the / after this. So this is basically the entire DocBlock. And as you can see, we've got different tags here. First of all, we've got a summary, which is one-liner. Then we have some sort of description, which goes on multiple lines. We have a section for tags as well. You can have different tags on the left-hand side. You've got a list of different tags which you can use. Ones that we are going to be using most often will be the var, for instance. If I click on this one, you may use the var tag to document the type of properties, sometimes called class variables. So when we have a property, let's say number on the address class, then we can use this var and indicate what sort of data type is going to be associated with this property, and so on. Let's go back to our editor, and I'm going to start with our address class. So we are going to start with the properties of this address class. And again, we're going to start with the /, two asterisks, hit return, and when I hit return, my IDE automatically has this macro kind of built in that generates the var tag for the property. So it starts with the var, obviously these asterisks on each new line, and then we close in the DocBlock with the asterisks and /. So var space, and this one will represent integer values, so it's going to be int or integer, whichever one you prefer. I'm going to stick with the int. The next one, for the public street, we are going to have variable. This one will most likely be a string, so I'm going to put a string. If you are not sure, also for the number, we may have a number, but it might be just the first line of the address. So what we can do here, it might be an integer, and then pipe, and it also might be a string. So you can do it like this. If there are the different possible data types that might be associated with the variable with a given property, then you can join them with the pipe in between. If you are unsure, you can remove all this and replace it with mixed. If you are not sure what sort of data type it might have, or if there are too many different data types that it might basically have associated with it. But I'm going to stick with the integer or string. Then for the town, it's going to be a string as well, so string. Then for the region, it's going to be a string as well. Then for the postcode, it's also going to be a string. And a country, usually that will be another object. It would be instance of, let's say, country object. But for this simple exercise, we're just going to stick with the string. It's going to be represented by the full name of the country, but it's a string. Okay, and then we have our methods. For the methods, I'm going to create DocBlock here, and my IDE automatically recognizes that there is an argument called joint, and that the data type associated with this argument is of a string type. That's why the param tag now, after the param itself, we have string, which represents the data type, and then the name of the argument, which is joint with the dollar sign, obviously. And then the return tag represents whatever the method returns. In our case, it's going to be a string. If the method does not return anything, then we simply put the tag return with the void keyword. In this case, it will return a string because we're imploding array with the joint with the string as well, and it will return a string for sure. Okay, let's put a quick summary or description. If it goes on more than one line, then it qualifies for a description. So what I'm going to put here, it's going to be get full address concatenated with a selected joint, or with a provided joint. There we go. So this is basically the DocBlock, the example of a DocBlock for a method. We have some description in this case. We have whatever parameters it takes and whatever it returns. Later on, we're going to be learning about exceptions. It can also throw an exception, at which point we would have throws, say exception, if it was a standard exception or any other exception that the method might throw. But at the moment, just don't worry about this because we didn't discuss exceptions yet. Okay, next one is a filtered properties method. So again, we are going to add the DocBlocks, and this one returns an array. It doesn't take any property, any arguments. Obviously, we don't have any param tag for this one, but let's give it a description. Get array of properties with associated values. And that, I think, does for this class. You can also add DocBlocks for the class, for the class itself, but because we are not going to be generating documentation later on, we only use this for our IDE, so that it easily actually identifies whatever data type is associated with the properties and what methods do and so on. I'm going to leave it off. You can also add different tags to the class DocBlocks and so on. There's lots that we can do. But for this simple exercise, let's just stick with what we have. Properties can also have a summary and description if you like to provide them with, but we are going to keep it simple. If you'd like to learn more about DocBlocks, please refer to the documentation which I've shown you at the beginning of the video. So I'm going to move to the person class. Let's scroll right to the top. And now, personally, I don't tend to put DocBlocks on a constants, but feel free to do it, obviously. I think that the value never changes, so it's pretty clear what it's going to be associated with. But again, feel free to use it if you'd like to. But let's do the properties ones. And this one will be a string because it's a first name, last name will be of the string type as well. Email will also be a string. Then we have telephone, which you might treat as an integer if you prefer, but I will keep it as string. And then address is going to be an object, an instance of the object. So this time I'm going to put the name of the class, which is address. There we go. So now if I scroll down, look what's happened now that I indicated what sort of data type, what sort of object in this case is associated with this property. You can see that full is now not highlighted, and it recognizes the method by default. It recognizes this method does actually exist on this specific object. I'm going to remove this and have a look at this. You can see automatically it gives me option to select one of the methods on the address object, because now it knows that this is the actual object. It's not just a normal standard primitive data type that this property is associated with. It's actually the object, and this object has these two public property methods which we can use. So as you can see, that's quite helpful in this sort of situations for auto-completion and that sort of things. Okay, let's go for the full name now. So for the full name, we are going to put DocBlock as well. It returns a string, and let's just put get our full name. And I think that's enough for the summary of this method. It's pretty much self-explanatory because the name of the method also makes sense. So even without the summary, we would know what it does. For this one, email link, it returns a string. We are going to put get email anchor tag or email HTML anchor tag. It's entirely up to you how you want to put it together. Okay, for the telephone link, we also returning a string, and this one's going to be get telephone anchor tag. And the last one is the full address. For this one, it also returns a string, as we are delegating a call to this address object, and then we call this full method on it, which returns a string, obviously. And for this one, I'm just going to put get full address and a full stop at the end. So that's pretty much everything. We've added DocBlocks to all of our properties and methods, and in the next video we are going to have a look at the concept of inheritance.